All right, hey everyone, strap in because we are going deep on API security today.
Oh,
You asked for the
yes.
full rundown, and we got you covered.
Absolutely.
We've got a crash course prepped using all the research that you sent.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like, is there even a day that goes by where you don't see another data breach in the headlines?
Right.
And APIs, more often than not,
Right.
are the weak link, right? So today,
Yeah.
think of this as your mission briefing
I love that.
on API security.
Yeah.
Not just why they're so vulnerable, which we'll definitely get into, but like actually how to navigate this whole security landscape, you know?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that they've become so embedded in our digital lives that most people don't even realize they're interacting with them constantly.
It's true.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't know, the unsung heroes of the internet.
That's a great analogy. I like
Yeah.
the unsung heroes working behind the scenes.
Yeah. Or maybe like the secret agents or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, before we go too far,
Yeah.
can we just back up for a sec? For anyone who's like, wait, what even is an API?
Yeah.
And why should I care about their security?
Yeah. So in the simplest terms, an API or application programming interface,
Right.
it allows different software systems to talk to each other and exchange information.
Right.
It's basically a messenger that delivers requests and responses between different applications.
So like, it's not just apps, it's websites, it's
Exactly.
connected devices, it's everything.
Websites, connected devices, anything you can think of that's powered by software is likely using APIs to communicate.
So here's where it gets kind of,
And this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
A little unnerving.
Interesting, yeah.
Over 83% of internet traffic is now API calls.
Oh.
Trillions of these digital interactions every single day.
Really?
By 2030.
Wow.
Gartner predicts we'll have 1 trillion API endpoints.
That's a lot of endpoints.
That's a staggering amount of data being exchanged. And with that comes a huge responsibility to keep it all secure.
So that's a lot of potential entry points.
Yeah.
For bad actors, right?
Absolutely.
So no surprise then that we're seeing more and more of these API breaches.
Exactly.
But like, how big of a problem are we really talking about here?
Well, remember that prediction from Gartner a few years back that by 2022, APIs would be the #1 attack vector?
Oh, yeah.
They were right.
Yeah.
And they might have even underestimated it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
APIs are now involved in about half of all data breaches.
No way.
It's not just a theoretical threat anymore. It's a very real and present danger.
Okay, so we're dealing with a lot of sensitive data flowing through these API pipelines.
Absolutely.
And they are prime targets.
Big time.
All right, well, let's talk about that research that you flagged for us from FireTail.
Yeah.
This cybersecurity company that's been tracking all these publicly disclosed API breaches.
Yeah, they've been doing some really important work.
So what did they find?
Their findings are pretty sobering.
Okay.
Over 630 million records exposed.
Wow.
Across more than 54 publicly disclosed breaches.
So this is just what we know about, right?
That's right. These are just the ones that have been made public.
Yeah.
And what's even more concerning is that it's not limited to any one industry or geography. These breaches are happening everywhere.
Okay, so this is widespread. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's affecting everyone.
Everyone's a potential target.
All right, so let's get down to the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Why are APIs so susceptible to attacks in the first place?
I think it boils down to a few key areas where they often fall short. You know, the first two are like the pillars of any security system.
Yep.
Authentication and authorization.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So authentication is verifying that you are who you say you are.
Right, like showing your ID.
Exactly, like showing your ID. And then authorization is determining what you're allowed to access.
Yeah.
Or do once you're in...
Once you've shown your ID, are you actually allowed to be there?
Exactly. So it's like checking your permissions.
Right.
And if either of those mechanisms is weak or flawed, that's a huge vulnerability.
And I'm guessing that's where a lot of these breaches originate.
Absolutely.
If I can, like, impersonate someone else.
Yeah.
Or trick the system into thinking I have more access than I should, it's game over, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, what else? What other sort of vulnerability?
And then you have something called broken object level authorization.
Okay.
This is a little more technical, but think of it this way. Imagine being able to access anyone's bank account.
Okay.
Just by changing a number in the URL. It might sound crazy, but that's essentially what happened in one of the cases.
Oh, wow.
That we'll look at.
Okay, getting nervous already.
All right, and then another common problem is poor data management.
Okay.
For example, if a company uses predictable sequential IDs for their data.
Like just counting up from 1.
Right, just like 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
It's like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for hackers to follow.
Yeah. So even
they can easily guess the next ID in the sequence.
Even seemingly small things like how you organize the data
absolutely
can create a huge risk.
Absolutely. Even minor details can have huge security implications.
And then, of course, there's the human element.
Right, the human element.
Misconfiguration.
Yeah.
Insecure network design.
Sometimes APIs are accidentally left exposed to the public internet.
Right, like leaving the door wide open.
The door left wide open, or the security settings might be too lax, allowing unauthorized access.
Right.
And this often happens due to human error, miscommunication, or just lack of awareness about best practices.
Okay, so let's bring this to life with some real world examples. Because you mentioned some pretty eye-opening cases.
Yeah.
Tell us about that one with the coffee chain.
Ah, yes, the coffee chain breach.
Yeah.
This involved a security researcher who discovered a vulnerability in a popular coffee chain's mobile app API.
Okay.
They were able to access over 100 million user records.
100 million.
100 million.
That's a lot of loyalty program points.
That's a lot of free coffee.
Yeah, seriously. So how did this researcher even...
Well, it all started with them basically poking around the API, looking for any weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
They started by testing for non-existent endpoints.
Okay.
Think of these as like digital doorways in the API, hoping to trigger some kind of error message.
Okay.
Right. Dang. And what they found were these verbose error messages that basically gave them a map of the API structure.
So the system's basically giving away the clues. Yeah. Like leaving the blueprints just lying around.
Like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. Yeah. And eventually they stumbled upon something called a GraphQL endpoint.
Okay. A GraphQL endpoint. I've heard of GraphQL.
GraphQL is a newer way for apps to communicate with APIs, allowing them to request very specific data.
Okay.
But in this case, this endpoint had zero security controls.
Zero.
None. Meaning anyone could access it.
Anyone.
And essentially download the entire database.
Oh, wow.
With a single query.
Like finding a master key that unlocks every door?
Yeah, you could see that.
So this wasn't just one vulnerability, it was a bunch of things.
This was a combination of factors. Yeah. You had poor enumeration controls, which allowed the researcher to map the API structure.
Right.
You had insecure error handling, where the error messages gave away too much information.
Right.
And then you had a complete lack of access controls on a sensitive API.
Okay, so next up we have the case of the exercise equipment data leak.
Ah, yes. This one hits close to home for many people.
This one's a bit closer to home, literally.
Yeah, literally.
What happened there?
So this involved a connected fitness device.
Yeah.
You know, the kind that tracks your workouts and connects to the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And it ended up leaking the personal data of 3 million users.
Wait, so my workout data isn't even safe?
Apparently not.
I thought that was like the one thing I didn't have to worry about.
Yeah, unfortunately in this case, no.
So what happened?
The researchers who discovered the vulnerability found that user IDs were easily guessable.
Okay.
And there were no authorization checks in place.
So someone could just guess my user ID?
Pretty much.
And just access all my fitness data, like all those embarrassing treadmill stumbles?
Yeah, essentially, they were able to write a simple script that systematically tried different user IDs. And because there were no safeguards in place, they were able to access the data.
Okay, so this really highlights how crucial, like just basic authentication.
Authentication and authorization.
And authorization is,
most basic.
Without those, you're basically leaving your data out in the open.
Yeah, you're basically asking for trouble.
Okay, and then last but not least, tell us about the telco breach.
This one involved an API that was supposed to be internal.
Okay.
Meaning only accessible within the company's own network.
Right.
However, due to a network misconfiguration, it was accidentally exposed to the public internet.
So they basically left a door wide open.
Pretty much.
And forgot to hire a security guard.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, This internal API lacked proper authentication.
Double whammy.
Meaning anyone who found it could access the data.
Oh, wow.
So the result was that attackers were able to access 11 million user records.
So this shows that this case demonstrates
API security isn't just about,
yeah, it's not
preventing hacking attempts. It's also about making sure they're configured properly.
Yeah, so making sure they're properly configured.
And only accessible to the right people.
To authorized users.
Yeah, so it was a combination of things, right? It was the configuration error.
It was a combination of a configuration error.
And the lack of authentication.
Okay,
so if we connect this back to what we were talking about earlier, pretty much all of these breaches involved multiple vulnerabilities.
Absolutely.
Working together.
It's rarely a single point of failure.
Right.
It's usually a combination of weaknesses that creates an opportunity for attackers.
And that's why it's so important to have this holistic approach to API security.
That's why a more holistic approach is so critical.
It's not enough to just
You can't just focus on one aspect.
Focus on one thing, just authentication or just network security.
Right, you have to think about it.
You need to consider the entire ecosystem and address vulnerabilities at every level.
Okay, so it sounds like those traditional cybersecurity approaches.
They definitely have their limitations.
The things that companies probably already have in place, like firewalls.
Right.
Firewalls, they aren't really enough to protect APIs.
Remember, APIs are designed to be accessible from anywhere on the internet.
Yeah.
So firewalls can't effectively block.
Yeah, because you want them to be accessible to the right people.
You want the good guys to be able to get in.
Right.
But you don't want the bad guys to get in.
Yeah, so firewalls can't really...
So it's a much more complex problem.
Right.
And installing security agents on every single device that interacts with an API, that's just not practical.
Especially in today's world.
Especially with
cloud computing and all that.
The rise of cloud computing.
Right, yeah.
Serverless architectures.
Okay, and what about monitoring tools?
Look,
I've heard a lot about those.
They're definitely valuable for detecting breaches after they've happened, but they don't prevent them.
So it's like having a security camera.
It's like having a security camera.
That only records the robbery.
What
doesn't stop it.
But doesn't actually stop it from happening.
Okay, so if traditional methods aren't enough...
So we need a new approach.
What does an effective API security strategy even look like? What should companies be doing?
It needs to be proactive, multi-layered, and address all the vulnerabilities we've been discussing.
Okay, so break that down for us. What are some concrete things?
What are some concrete actions companies can take to bolster their API security? Well, one of the most important steps, and often the most overlooked, is discovery. You can't secure what you don't know exists.
That makes sense.
Right. So companies need to start by identifying all the APIs in their environment.
Okay, so this might seem obvious.
It might seem straightforward, but
in a big company, it's probably...
In large organizations,
really
complex IT infrastructure, it can be quite a challenge.
So it's not just knowing what APIs you have in production, it's also the ones that are still being developed. And maybe even some,
And even the ones...
lurking in the shadows,
The ones that are lurking in the shadows, the ones that people have forgotten about.
Okay.
There are tools and techniques available to help companies with this process, but it often requires a combination of automated discovery and manual effort.
It's like taking inventory.
But
for your digital assets.
Yeah.
Okay, what comes next?
Once you have a complete inventory.
The next step is to assess the security posture of each API.
So you're looking for any weak spots.
Identifying potential vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. And there are different approaches to doing this. One common method is penetration testing. Where ethical hackers,
so
the good guys, try to break into your systems
to
identify vulnerabilities.
Like hiring a team of friendly burglars.
That's a great analogy.
To test your security system. I like that.
Penetration testing can be very effective, but it's also resource intensive.
Yeah, so it's not.
There are also automated security scanning tools that can help companies identify common vulnerabilities more efficiently.
Okay,
so it's often a combination
of manual and automated approaches.
Okay. Tailored to the specific needs of the organization. Got it. And then what about, like, actually preventing these attacks?
That's where things like API gateways and web application firewalls come into play.
Okay.
These are essentially security checkpoints that sit in front of your APIs.
So they're like the bouncers at the club.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Making sure only the people with the right credentials get in.
Got it.
A well-configured API gateway can block a wide range of attacks.
Like what kind of attacks?
Things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, brute force attacks.
Okay, so those are all
common.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, these are all very common.
Okay, so you've got your inventory, you've assessed the vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
You've put some of these defenses in place.
Right.
What else is there?
Monitoring and logging are crucial.
Okay.
Companies need to have centralized audit trails that track all API activity.
So that if something does happen...
Exactly, you can see what happened and respond quickly.
So it's not just about preventing.
It's not just about prevention.
It's also about being able to...
It's also about detection.
Respond.
And response.
Yeah.
The faster you can detect and respond to a breach, the less damage it's likely to cause.
Makes sense. And what about...
And then finally...
that end-to-end tracing stuff we talked about earlier.
Yeah, end-to-end tracing.
How does that fit into the whole...
Is all about being able to link API activity back to the developers who built them.
Okay.
This fosters accountability.
Right. So
you know exactly who built what.
Who built what.
And it makes it much easier to troubleshoot problems and remediate vulnerabilities.
So if there's an issue.
You
know where to go.
You know exactly where to go.
Right, to fix it.
It also encourages developers to think about security from the outset.
Yeah.
Rather than treating it as an afterthought.
Right. So it's about shifting the mindset from, like, let's build it first and secure it later. Yeah, that's the old way of thinking.
To, let's just build security in.
Security needs to be baked in.
From the beginning.
From day one.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a much more effective approach.
This has been super insightful.
Yeah, it's a complex topic.
It seems like building a robust API security strategy.
It's an ongoing process.
It's not... It's
not a one-time fix.
Like a one-time thing.
It's a continuous cycle of assessment, improvement.
And adapting as things change.
And adaptation.
Yeah, and it requires a commitment from everyone, right?
It requires a commitment from everyone involved.
Yeah.
From developers and security professionals to business leaders and even end users.
So we all have a role to play.
In
making the digital world a safer place.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of part 1
of
our deep dive into API security.
Looking forward to part 2.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have.
But don't worry, there's more to come.
Yeah.
Much more to come.
So stay tuned.
So, we've talked a lot about companies and what they need to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to also address, like, what can individuals do?
Right, because...
to protect themselves.
You might be thinking, okay, this is all pretty scary.
Yeah.
But what can I actually do about it?
Exactly.
As just a regular person,
Yeah, it's easy to feel powerless.
Yeah.
When you hear about these massive data breaches.
Totally.
It can feel like it's all out of our control.
Like, what can I do?
So while you can't control how companies secure their APIs, you can definitely be more mindful of how you interact with them.
Okay.
So it starts with being aware of the apps you use.
Right.
And the permissions you grant them.
Yeah, like location data, access to my contacts.
Exactly.
All that stuff.
Things like location data, access to your contacts, your camera, your microphone.
Yeah, like they want permission to access everything.
It's like they want access to your entire life.
Yeah.
And it's easy to just click allow
Yeah.
without really thinking about it.
Right.
But next time an app asks for permission, take a moment to consider whether it really needs that level of access.
Okay, so ask yourself.
Yeah, ask yourself.
Does this fitness tracker...
Does this app really need
to know my location all the time?
To access my photos?
Or access my contacts list?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not.
That's good advice. And I've definitely been guilty.
You've all been there.
Of just clicking allow.
Yeah.
So what else can we do to protect ourselves?
Another crucial step is using strong, unique passwords.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. I know it sounds like a broken record.
But it's true.
But it's so important for each of your online accounts.
Okay.
And enable multi-factor authentication.
Okay, wait, remind me.
Yeah.
What is multi-factor authentication again?
It's basically an extra layer of security.
Okay.
That requires you to confirm your identity in more than one way.
Okay.
Usually it means entering a code that's sent to your phone or email along with your password.
So even if someone...
So even if someone steals your password,
yeah,
they still can't get into your account.
Without that second piece of the puzzle.
Without that second factor.
Okay, so it makes it a lot harder.
It makes it a lot harder.
Got it.
So strong passwords.
Yeah.
Multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Being mindful of app permissions.
Yeah.
That's a good checklist.
Okay. Anything else we should keep in mind?
It's also important to stay informed about data breaches.
Oh, okay.
You can sign up for alerts from websites like Have I Been Pwned?
Have I Been Pwned?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which tracks data breaches and lets you know if your email address has been compromised.
So if a company that you use has been breached.
Yeah, if a company you use has been breached, take steps to change your password, monitor your accounts. Okay.
For any suspicious activity.
So it's not just about being cautious up front.
It's not just about prevention.
It's also about...
It's also about being vigilant.
Yeah.
And responding quickly if something does happen.
Okay, so be proactive.
Be proactive.
Take control.
Yeah, take control of your digital security.
Don't just rely on companies.
You can't just rely on companies to protect your data.
Right.
You have to be an active participant.
In your own online safety.
In your own online safety.
This has been super helpful. I feel like I'm
glad to hear it.
Already starting to think differently about how I approach this whole online security thing.
That's the goal.
Okay, but let's shift gears a bit and circle back to what companies can do.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, they're the ones building and managing these APIs.
They have a huge responsibility to ensure that their APIs are secure.
And we talked about,
But as we've seen,
traditional approaches aren't always enough.
Traditional cybersecurity approaches often fall short.
Right. So if companies want to go beyond those basic measures, what are some of the key strategies they should be focusing on?
FireTail's research, which you shared, offers some excellent recommendations.
Okay.
I think it's worth spending some time unpacking those.
Yeah, let's walk through them.
Yeah.
Because I have a feeling our listeners are eager to know.
I'm sure they are.
What they can do to advocate for better API security.
Absolutely.
Whether it's at their own company or just as an informed consumer.
So their approach emphasizes a proactive and multi-layered strategy that addresses the entire API lifecycle.
The whole.
From design and development to deployment and ongoing management.
All right, so the first step.
The first step, as we've already touched upon, is discovery.
Right.
You can't secure what you don't know exists.
Makes sense.
So companies need to start by identifying all the APIs in their environment.
Okay, and this might seem...
It might seem straightforward.
But I bet in a big company, it's...
large organizations.
Really hard.
It can be quite a challenge.
So it's not just knowing what APIs you have, like in production. It's also the ones that are still being developed.
The ones in development.
Maybe even some...
ones that are hiding out,
lurking in the shadows.
The shadow APIs,
The ones that people have forgotten about.
Okay.
There are tools and techniques available to help companies with this process. But it often requires a combination of automated discovery and manual effort.
So it's like taking inventory.
It's like taking inventory.
Of your digital assets.
But for your digital assets.
Got it. Okay, what comes next?
Once you have a complete inventory, the next step is to assess the security posture.
So you're looking for weak spots.
Looking for weak spots.
Yeah. Identifying potential vulnerabilities, misconfigurations.
Okay.
And there are different approaches to doing this.
Okay.
One common method is penetration testing.
Penetration testing.
Where ethical hackers...
So these are the,
These are the good guys.
Yeah.
Who try to break into your systems.
Okay.
To identify vulnerabilities.
So hiring...
It's like hiring a team of friendly burglars.
Yeah. To test your security system.
To test your security system.
I like that analogy.
Penetration testing can be very effective, but it's also resource intensive.
It can be expensive, yeah.
It can be expensive. There are also automated security scanning tools that can help companies identify common vulnerabilities.
Okay, so you're going to want...
So it's often a combination of manual and automated approaches tailored to the specific needs of the organization.
Got it. And then what about, actually preventing the attacks.
That's where things like API gateways and web application firewalls come into play.
API gateways, we talked about those.
Yes. These are essentially security checkpoints that sit in front of your APIs.
So they're like the bouncers at the club.
Exactly. They're like the bouncers at the club.
Okay.
Making sure
only letting the right people in.
Only the people with the right credentials get in.
Got it.
A well-configured API gateway can block a wide range of attacks.
Like what kind of attack?
Things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, brute force attacks.
These are all
These are all common.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, these are all very common attack vectors that API gateways can help protect against.
So you've got your inventory, you've assessed the vulnerabilities, you've put some of these defenses in place. What else?
Monitoring and logging are crucial. Companies need to have centralized audit trails that track all API activity.
So that if something happens...
Exactly. So that if something does happen, you can see what happened and respond quickly.
So it's not just about preventing the attacks.
It's not just about prevention.
It's also about
It's also about detection and response.
Yeah, being able to respond if something happens.
The faster you can detect and respond to a breach, the less damage it's likely to cause.
Makes sense. And what about those end-to-end tracing capabilities?
End-to-end tracing
we talked about
is all about being able to link API activity back to the developers who built them.
So you know who built what.
You know exactly who built what.
And where to go to fix it.
And where to go to fix it.
Right.
It also encourages developers to think about security from the outset.
From the beginning,
rather than treating it as an afterthought.
So it's about changing that mindset from
Yeah, it's about shifting the mindset.
Build it first, secure it later.
From build it first, secure it later to let's bake security in.
From day one.
From day one.
I like that.
That's a much more effective approach in the long run.
This has been super insightful, I feel like, building a robust API security strategy.
It's an ongoing process.
It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing...
It's not a one-time fix. It's a continuous cycle of assessment, improvement, and adaptation.
And it requires a commitment from everyone.
It requires a commitment from everyone involved, from developers, security professionals, business leaders, and even end users.
So we all have a role to play.
We all have a role to play.
In making the digital world a safer place.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground in this part.
We have.
But there's still more to explore, so stay tuned for part 3.
Stay tuned.
Okay, we're back for the final part of our API security deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot. From, just what APIs even are to how common these breaches are and what companies can do to protect themselves.
It's a big topic.
Yeah, it is. But before we wrap up, let's zoom out for a second and talk about the bigger picture.
I think what's really interesting is how much the world relies on APIs without even realizing it. It's like this invisible infrastructure that underpins our entire digital lives.
And I mean, the amount of data.
It's mind-boggling, the sheer volume of data.
That's flowing through these API pipelines.
Trillions of interactions every day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So with that comes a huge responsibility to make sure those connections are secure.
Right, and that responsibility, it's not just on the companies, right?
No, it's not just on the companies.
Or it's on the developers.
It's on developers, it's on security professionals.
Policymakers.
Policymakers, it's on all of us, really.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the threats, but the good news is, awareness is growing.
Awareness is growing, and with that awareness comes innovation.
Yeah.
We're seeing more sophisticated tools and techniques emerge to help protect APIs.
So it's not all doom and gloom, you know?
It's not all doom and gloom.
There's a sense of urgency, but there's also a sense of okay, we've got to tackle this.
There's a recognition that we need to address this challenge.
Yeah.
Head on.
Okay, so key takeaway for companies. Be proactive.
Be proactive. Don't wait for a breach to happen before you start taking API security seriously.
Yeah, you can't just wait until something bad happens.
You need to be constantly assessing your systems, identifying vulnerabilities, implementing appropriate safeguards.
So it's not a one-time fix.
It's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process.
It's a process
of vigilance and adaptation.
Okay, so for our listener who's been with us this whole time,
absorbing all this information.
Yeah, what are some key takeaways that they should really remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is just to remember that APIs are everywhere.
Yeah.
They're the connective tissue of our digital world.
They are.
And they're handling increasingly sensitive data.
Yeah.
So API security is everyone's responsibility.
Right.
Companies need to prioritize it.
Yeah.
Developers need to build security into their code.
Okay.
And individuals need to be mindful of their own digital footprint.
So be aware of the apps you use.
Yeah, be aware of the apps you use. The permissions you grant them.
The security practices.
The security practices you employ.
That you use yourself.
The knowledge is power.
Yes.
The more you understand about API security, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself.
Okay.
And advocate for stronger security practices.
And I think it's pretty clear this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, absolutely.
API security is.
It's a complex and evolving field. Yeah. We'll be talking about this for years to come.
We'll definitely be revisiting it.
Yeah, for sure.
In the future.
It's a fascinating area.
Yeah, it is.
And one that's only going to become more important.
Well, on that note of cautious optimism.
Cautious optimism. I like that.
I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It's been a journey.
That has.
A whirlwind tour of API security.
But hopefully, you've learned some things along the way.
Hopefully you've gained some valuable insights.
I know I have.
Me too.
It's been great having you.
It's been a pleasure being here.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has empowered you.
Absolutely.
To, navigate the digital world more safely.
More safely, more securely.
And securely.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, stay vigilant.